Alright, we got some noise. Now we'll see if anybody shows up. Who knows? Anybody there? Alright, so it seems that we probably have sound, but we need some people to... Oh, there says some people in there, but I haven't seen anybody say they can hear what's going on. Maybe one of them's Jimmy. He can come in from Kansas City. Tell me what I'm screwing up on. So let's see. Good afternoon, Jim. Jim's in the house. That's a different Jim than our regular Jim. So Terry's in, says hi. Hello there. So we'll let people show up a little bit. As you can imagine, I'm a little nervous. No, I'm not nervous, but because I'm not going to try and talk guns today. I'm just going to talk manufacturing and dollar stuff, so that'll be good. Jimmy's down in Kansas City. He sent us a picture of the setup of the show, and today I think was the first full day. I haven't heard how everything went. Richard Triplett in the air. Jim says we sound good. That's good. So yeah, he's down there. We're starting into a law enforcement line. We've been spending the last couple months getting to know a bunch of our local law enforcement folks and trying to figure out, hey, what's the stuff that we can do to help them. I think we talked about it. Jim talked about it last week that he was certainly surprised. I was too, that he's a gun guy, and he figured, all right, so most police, law enforcement guys are dealing with guns on a regular basis, and so they're probably gun guys too. And what we discovered is so many of them really aren't. They they use their service pistol, and especially the rifles and stuff, they shoot once a year to qualify, and obviously they use them when they need to, but they're not necessarily into the, say, building and stuff that some of those of us who come here on Tuesdays are into. So getting to deal with the gunsmiths and the folks that are the armorer for the different law enforcement divisions, they spread out, so smaller communities will get an armorer that they'll share and use those services that they need to do. They get some stuff that comes from the military and maybe needs to get upgraded, maybe needs to get adjusted, and so trying to see how we can help them do that. And I know he's down there with we've been talking, and we've showed, I think, a couple times our over the suppressor. It's a new Handguard line coming out, and a lot of the law enforcement folks are doing a lot more suppressed stuff because they're in close contact, close spaces where they need to be able to operate within walls, and when you fire a gun in that space, it can be pretty loud, and so the opportunity, it's hard to tell the bad guys, hey, stop, I'm going to put some hearing protection on before I fire my weapon. And so having a silencer definitely changes the equation, just makes it safer from a decibel standpoint for the law officers and everybody involved. So so he's down there doing that. We'll get I'm sure he will talk about it next week as he returns, and we'll get some stories on some of the other stuff that he saw at the show, and the feedback that we got from the law enforcement professionals that he saw. I'm sure we'll get some feedback on the barbecue down there in Kansas City, because that's something I know when I've been in Kansas City I go check out. There's a place called Jim's that's pretty awesome. But so today we're going to talk about gun parts, AR parts, and what do they cost, why do they cost what they cost, and there's three main factors that kind of play into that. One is the cost that it costs to produce, and we'll talk a bunch about that. Some of it is the market and what the market is driving, and that, so partly that comes off of the cost that it takes to do stuff. But then thirdly is kind of the image or the category that the parts are trying to be in. So and one of the analogies that's really easy to use and talk about is we talk about cars, right? And so you got a Kia, or you got a Jaguar, or you got a Lamborghini, or you got a Ford, or you got a pickup truck or whatever. So the difference in those costs, similarly, some of it's purely on, hey, how many are you making? If you're going to make 1 million of them versus making 25,000, there's going to be cost that's going to be different. So we'll explore some of that analogy. I have a bunch of parts here that is some of our normal stuff, and we'll talk our way through what the cost of stuff is, and why it costs what it costs, because that's a big factor, especially as we talk with builders, getting the budget in line. We sell full kits, but not everybody can pull the trigger on a full kit. So knowing what pieces and parts people need, and being able to buy a more cost-effective full rifle and then adjust it and modify it, that's a big part of that architect evolution that we talk about. So one of the big things that we run on a regular basis, and it's kind of our entree into the industry, was handguards, and so we have a couple here, and so we'll talk about why these cost what they do. So we got two here. This is our standard line, right? So this is our Cornerstone series and our Foundation series handguards, and so we'll touch on these a little bit. So first of all, the raw material for a handguard is an extrusion. So I have a raw piece of extrusion. You guys have, on some of the past shows, we've gone out on the floor and we've seen what it is, right? So this is an aluminum shape that, if I hold it just right to the camera, hey, I can see you, right? So this is from back in the old days, right? So this raw material, sometimes it looks really pristine on the outside. Sometimes it's got little dings and stuff. And so when we first got into making handguards, we would use an extrusion like this, or we would use a customer supplied extrusion. And our Foundation series is from that initial wear, where we cut every single face that you see on this part, right? So every surface is cut, all these details are machined in, and nothing is as originally extruded. Okay, and so as we were doing that for a number of years, then we said, okay, if we wanted to pull some costs out, provide a less costly alternative, so this Cornerstone series, the external surfaces that you see, the main ones, they're all as extruded. So, and it's hard to see the difference, and that's intentional on our part, right? We want to make sure that it looks very similar. You'll also notice that, so the holes between the two, and I don't know whether you can see it against my shirt, Myra, but the these are bigger holes than these, right? So there's less of them, and they're bigger, and so less machine time to put this row of holes than all these holes in. Bigger tool can go faster, smaller tool you got to go a little slower, and there's more of them, right? And so having simpler geometry for us to be able to make. The other thing, and this is actually true now for all of our handguards, in the past when we were making these M-locks, there's a specification of the thickness of the M-lock, and in the past we had actually undercut, so we would get that proper spacing, which meant we had a tool go in and kind of carve out the back side of that face. Now we get the extrusion the right width, so we don't have to do that. So we can just put a hole there and it meets the right width for the M-lock. So that tool that used to go in there was a very tiny tool, very fragile. We would break a lot of them. They were more expensive than a standard tool because they were special cut. And so eliminating that reduced some of the tooling costs. And that's part of the nice thing about aluminum. So these are aluminum parts, is it's fairly easy on the tools. We have a lot of tools that carbide that's designed to, and even high-speed steel that is designed to cut steel, which is harder on the parts than, or harder on the tools than aluminum is. So getting an extrusion tool made, so there's, when we get extrusion, so the first time you do it, you design a tool, and they quote it typically $2,000 to $2,500 to get the tool, and you got to then buy a minimum push, they call it, so they push it through the tool to come out in that shape. That minimum tool is a roughly, you got to buy $2,500 to $3,000 worth of material, and that's X number of feet, depending on how much that it weighs. So you're buying this by the inch on how much it weighs, and so roughly $5,000–6,000 you can get an initial lot of extrusion to the various size that you want. So we have, I think, let's see, we have a tool for our Foundation series, we have a tool for our Cornerstone series, we have a tool for our quad parts, which I didn't happen to grab one. We have a tool for our ARV series, right? So the profile of this part is different than the profile of this part. I don't know that that's easy to see on the camera, but this heavy part at the bottom, to make that ARV piece, there's a lot of material there that, and we just don't have that same material on this side. It's not as wide at the bottom. So having multiple tools, obviously each one of those, we're paying $2,000, $2,500 for, and then you got to order a certain amount of material for that. So the other thing, so again, we'll compare the Cornerstone series, and this is just another one of our handguards, and I brought so the complexity of the design, right? So the smaller inside radiuses, being able to put other designs, what Jim would refer to as bling, right? Those extra features require extra time, and so again, partly what the cost driver. So this is the cost drivers of these is how much time does it take to do the machining. So we take a raw piece of extrusion, we cut it to length, we machine the ends, and then once we put it in a 4th axis, then we can do all of the rest of the work as we spin it around. And this part is the same length as this part, and yet the machine time to put all these features in is much longer than the machine time to put these in. And so this is a more costly handguard. And so as you look at different handguards in the marketplace, obviously the longer it takes to cut it, typically the more expensive it would be. The other thing is all the ones I've shown you so far are black. We also have Cerakoted stuff. It's a different process. Tends to be a more expensive process. It's more of a paint application, where this is a dunk, a dunking thing, right? So the parts get blasted in pretty much all of those processes, and if you're doing a lot of handguards of a particular size, the blasting can be pretty automated. So that at least both makes it more consistent, and it can take cost out of it, whereas a Cerakote, typically you're doing them one at a time, and the skill of the operator tends to be more important there, but you're also paying somebody to be right there doing it, as opposed to putting them on a rack, having them go through a blast process, and then getting dunked and coated. So the different colors, the nice thing about Cerakote is you can do almost any color. It's very durable coating, but it is more expensive, and so you see when they come out in colors that you're going to see, if it's maybe, I don't know, $4 to $6 to do this, maybe it's $15 to $20 to do this, and that's where Jimmy will then come back to the video and tell me how I misquoted all the numbers. But the opportunity to recognize the difference between the two, and the fact that these do have to get coated, is an important add. So handguards, and so we'll touch on it. So that's the cost side equation, right? How much does it cost to be able to produce one of these, which is an important part of the cost driver. I'm going to make sure I'm not missing. Oh, see, there are. This guy, and there's Jimmy. Good afternoon. Do you guys extrude the aluminum, or we buy the extrusion? So James, we buy the extrusion, so that market is very challenging right now. I think our lead time for a new product is 70 weeks or something. I mean, it's preposterous at our current extruder, and they're just buried. We buy them. How do I get this thing, Jimmy, to keep scrolling with the new stuff? So we definitely buy that. Do you extrude aluminum, or do you buy? Okay. So yeah. So no, we definitely we buy the extrusion. It's the factories that are running. I think we actually put on the website one time. Rick went to one of the extrusion places and took, and we get them in 12-foot lengths, and they're cutting them as they come out. So these extrusion lines are really, really long, narrow. Typically, they're in long, narrow buildings that they have a lengthy front-end process that puts it through, and it melts the aluminum, pushes it through, and then has a series of cooling to both help shape and obviously cool it from molten down to the stuff that we're going to see, and then once it gets flowing pretty good, then they saw cut. Typically they'll do some deburring to the ends and then put them on pallets. 12-foot lengths is typical. Sometimes they also will typically cut to length if you want to. We get them in 12-foot lengths, so we have flexibility because we don't know what size and what lengths our customers are going to order. So we'll try and make sure we stay up with we have the same issue getting brass cups here at work. 12-month plus lead time. I mean, it's, how to imagine having so much work that you have over a year lead time is remarkable. So, but that's what we're dealing with. And so the good news is we have had kind of blanket orders out there for the bunch of the different shapes that we have, and they've been good to work with as we adjust based on the demand that we're seeing from our customers. So there's a cost side equation, right? So a couple ways to price things. You want to take what your cost is, and then you mark it up to make sure you make some profit in there. So that's one part of the equation. The other is, hey, what's the market price for the product that you're selling. In this case, what's the market price for a handguard? And so trying to compare yourself to comparable products in the marketplace, and make sure that we recognize who we're competing against, the nature of how ours is. Now, the last piece of the equation is kind of what do you want your product to stand? How does it make your customer feel when they buy it, right? And we know a lot of people who, if it's not a $150 or $200 handguard, it must be a piece of junk, right? And so obviously we don't believe that, because we don't charge $150 for any of the handguards that we sell. But the opportunity to recognize, okay, so we don't have a big name in the industry yet, and so the guys who have a big name, it means something to get one and put it on your rifle, and hey, I'm going to have that name, and how does it make you feel when you buy it? And that, I come back to the car analogy, right? To buy so they're buying Teslas right now, the high-end, the Jaguar, any of the high-end stuff. You can get a Kia, you can get a Hyundai, you can get these things, and they're cars. They function, but obviously we as consumers, we're willing to pay more for how it's going to make us feel, and what level of stuff that we want in it, and what level of luxury, if we will, we want to have in it. And so, when we came into this, our pricing was based on not just the overall market pricing, but it was based on Jim's sense of what should something cost. And so Jim doesn't want to pay more than he thinks he should, and obviously he knows the cost side of the equation because he's a machinist. And so we've tried to tailor ourselves to guys like Jim who know they want quality stuff, but can't afford to just buy a $250 handguard because, hey, that one looked cool and money's not an option. So he knows what he wants, and he has an eye for functionality, and yet obviously he knows that, and we know that if we make something that he's not proud to put on his gun, then we probably shouldn't put it out in the marketplace. So obviously those three factors: how much does it cost to produce? What are the factors that do that? Now, the other thing, in some of the handguards that we make, the ends will get cut at different shapes or different styles, and that adds an extra machining operation. So we do this machining, and then if we have to do something extra on the end to put some other thing, that adds cost to the equation. And obviously it's designed to make it look cool or be functional in some way. Mostly it's just an appearance thing, and so that does add cost to the equation. The other thing, and I don't have a wrench here, maybe I do. I do. So the other piece to our handguards is the barrel nut, right? So this is steel made out of a tube. I don't think this one, yes, it does have a barrel nut. Oh, but it's a different Allen key. Let's see if this one works. Am I holding my breath? I am not. It does not fit. There should be one around here, but I'm not going to worry about it. So steel tube. We run it on a lathe. So buying the tubing helps us because there's less machining to do. We used to make them out of bar stock before we ordered the tubing. The nice thing is we can make multiple barrel nuts out of the same raw material tubing. So we have grooves on there. We try and remove the weight, right? Everybody wants to keep this down. This almost feels like it weighs as much as the handguard. Pretty darn close because it's steel, and yet that attachment point to the upper, and the fit here, one of the first things that Jim does whenever it's hooked up to an upper, so whenever we go anywhere, that's an AR-10 upper. Let's try an AR-15 upper. So the first thing Jim does when he sees it assembled, he looks for that right across there to make sure that it fits smooth there, right? And so the gaps there or the height differences drives him insane, and that's his quick check to see, hey, how quality of a handguard is it? The other thing he looks for when he squeezes, when he assembles a clamp-on style, is there a gap or does it look like it got mashed? And that's partly how they assemble. And so this is another part of the cost equation, this relationship, so making sure this bore is a good fit so that it's a really tight, you can hear, if I'm close enough thing, you can hear that there's metal, it's a slip fit, but it's close because we want to make sure that we're going to create that friction across when we clamp it on because we want a thing to stay on. So we have to tightly control that, both the outside diameter of this part and the inside diameter of this bore, to make sure that mate fits up well. So that, holding that tight tolerance diameter is part of what drives the cost of the part. So that's pretty much Handguard. Oh, then, so the ARV, so most of all this is conventional machining, and then we have something that we do that creates these contours, and we call it 3D contour machining, and I mean everybody calls it that. The opportunity, if you look really, really close, you can, on some of them, you can just see the faint hint of, if you're looking for it, the underlying machining marks to make this. Taking really tiny bites, tiny passes, takes longer. So it may take as long to make this handguard as it did to make this handguard, in some cases longer. So the opportunity to, again, it's a time thing. Obviously, the look of this is, designed to be an MP5 clone, and so you're comparing this part to what a $2,500 rifle looks like, and to buy $100 and some handguard based on the machining that we do, it's more costly than these because there's a lot more machining to it. And so similar barrel nut, I think it's actually the same barrel nut. And so, again, a lot of machining to get that done, and the time thing, and the perception in the marketplace, the cool factor, right? So this is easily it is the top selling thing. I think the 7-inch version, that is the 7-inch version. This is the top selling thing on our website because it's cool. It looks like the MP5. Obviously, it doesn't cost $2,500, and yet there's a cool factor that says, man, that thing is really sweet. So that's handguards. I don't know if anybody has any questions on that. It doesn't look like. I think I'm staying up with that. So again, the cost. So our handguards, and the other piece, and so the MSRPs that you can see on our website, we do have a bunch of gun stores that we sell to. We have some distributors, and they are designed and set up to help serve the marketplace, right? So obviously we can go out to our local gun stores and provide them stuff, but the broader reach is by going through distribution, by going through partners that deal with the marketplace and the people out there. So when you go to a bunch of different websites, you can see our parts there. Obviously they're not doing that for nothing. So the breakdown of how we have to sell our stuff to go through distribution, we have to discount the price so that they can still make something and have the MSRP be equivalent to what we would sell it if we were selling direct. And so we really focus on driving people to our distributors, driving people to the gun stores, because that's where they're going to get the most help from the people near them, especially in those gun stores when they're going to go do a build. Most of the people buying our stuff are either doing modifications or doing builds, and we want them to go to their gun store where they can get help that they need, have all the other components and tools and stuff that they need to do that. Obviously, hey, we'll sell stuff off the website if somebody just needs something, they know what they're doing, and they want to go ahead and get it. So that's handguards. Hopefully that makes a little sense. So our foundation series, the MSRP, I should know all this off the top of my head, but so I think the most expensive foundation series just cracks the $100 mark in the MSRP, and it comes down. So the Cornerstone series is in the $80 to $90 range. I think the foundation is $90 to $105 range. So again, we're fighting against that stigma that, hey, if it's $100 or $100, it's got to be a piece of junk, and we know these are really solid handguards. And the number of times where we put them in people's hands, we had one guy who's like, I don't even need this, but at this price I have to buy it, because he could feel the quality in it, and he's like, hey, for $80 or whatever it was, he said, I gotta have one. So it's encouraging to us when people actually feel and touch the parts and recognize, hey, this is really quality stuff, and yet it's not charging an arm and a leg. We're not trying to charge for a brand name that we're buying. It's not a Louis Vuitton purse or something, right? It's a handguard that's very, very functional and very high quality. All right, so other parts and pieces. So one of the ones that is out there in the marketplace a lot, the upper. So we make a billet upper. And when I say billet upper, and I brought some show and tell, you guys have been through the shop on some of the tours, but so this is the slug of raw material. So this is 7075. There's two kinds of aluminum that are very standard in these parts. There's 6061 and there's 7075. 7075 is dramatically more expensive. It is what I'll call, there is a significant step up in the properties of the material that make it better. You know, it's the industry uses 7075, and so many people, again, if it's not 7075, they don't want it, and that's understandable. There are a number of folks that are doing it in the 6061, and so that is something you want to pay attention to if you're looking to make sure the nature of the material that you're using. This is a billet, so this is, when we say billet, this is a hunk of aluminum, the forged version. So it's a net shape of this. We don't actually have any forgings here because back at the beginning of the pandemic we tried to order them and they said, oh, you get them in 8 to 22 months. So they didn't actually say 22, they said plus, you know, it was at least a year, and so we never got them. The nice thing for us is it allows us to control the process. So we start with this hunk of aluminum and we turn it into this. I brought one of the intermediate stages, right? So one of the cost drivers is how many times you have to hold onto the part to turn it from that big block into this, right? And so we try and minimize the number of times that we have to hold onto the part. The geometry of this is pretty challenging, right? There's a lot of stuff going on down inside of it. There's stuff going on with the dust cover here. This being at an off angle means we have to deal with that machining. So we use a couple different horizontal machining operations. So it's in a horizontal, it can be turned this way, or it can be turned this way. So we do similar things on our handguard. So you know, the fourth axis allows it to spin, so we can do all that work in one work holding. But you know, we're trying to do as much as we can, and yet recognize there are important dimensional aspects to this part that we need to maintain. And so we're balancing that. I think there's 5 different operations to make this part that starts from this hunk of material. So when you're shopping for an upper, you know, looking to see what's the material, is it billet or forged, and there are differences. The forging is a process where, you know, you're compressing the raw material into a net shape that looks like this, and then you know, obviously there's stuff machined away versus you know, a block of aluminum that we then cut everything away from. So there are some advantages to the forging. Obviously, when you have it in the net shape, you have typically less machining to do, but you have a more expensive piece of raw material. So where that trade-off is, sometimes it works to your advantage, sometimes it doesn't. So you know, it's expensive, but relative to a forging, it's typically not. And yet you have more machining to do. Now, the other aspect when you have a forging, and we saw this at the early part of the pandemic, right? You're making tens of thousands of them because it's a very expensive tool. I don't know if it's $15,000 to $30,000, depending on how big a press they're using and what they're doing. So you put a big investment in, and then you can bang them out, and so it can end up trying to be cost competitive to just billet, especially if you're, say, forging in 6061 and comparing it to a billet in 7075. But so the number of machining operations that it takes to do it is an important factor. Obviously, the coating is again an important factor. The fact that this is a pretty standard part for most AR-15 stuff means that you know, you can make, the companies that are making them can make a lot of them because everybody uses roughly the same thing. Obviously, the coatings can be different colors and different things. There's some nuance. Some of them have the forward assist, some of them don't. So there's some nuanced differences, but knowing what material it's coming out of is an important part of making sure you're really comparing apples to apples. Let's see, the aluminum. So we have an angled foregrip. This is another one of our more popular parts. It goes on the bottom of the handguard, you know, in a direct M-lock, which is nice. If I can get this to go together without, there we go. So on the bottom, you know, designed to be very ergonomic. And so this part, right, machining comes out of an aluminum block, and you know, we put it on a fourth to be able to hold it one time and do a bunch of that machining. At some point we have to flip it over and get rid of the stuff that was on the back. our new offering, and I think you guys saw this in the email, where we also now have a sling mount attachment on the back of that angled foregrip. That's adding an extra machining operation. We have to take essentially this part and we have to put it in a spot where we can drill that hole out. So slightly more expensive than the other one because we added that extra operation. Obviously the coating, similar to all this stuff, the coating adds to the process. If it's anodizing, it's fairly straightforward. If it's Cerakoting or something else, it can be more expensive. Jimmy talked about rattle can. We have a bunch of guys who've just done painting and stuff. So other pieces and parts, so fairly simple. This is the vertical foregrip. There's a couple different Jimmy says the most ergonomic foregrip that he's ever seen because he designed it for his specific fingers. So that's not typical. Once we program it though, it doesn't really take any difference in time than it would if they were just all equal ones. It just feels a lot better. So the opportunity to take a relatively standard size of bar stock, I think this was out of 1-inch stock. So the other thing that Jim does in the design side, so he won't design it at 1-inch diameter. He'll design it at something just under 1-inch diameter, so we can buy 1-inch stock and then we can machine 10, 20 thousandths away, so that we have a very clean outside machine finish, and yet we can use standard bar stock because we don't want to add costs by having to get bigger stock just because you want to get to a particular size. Now you can't always work around that, but certainly on these we did. The flash can, so another one of our more popular parts. The hole down there, not too bad. Obviously it's very light, which we like. There's a lot of machining, but it's pretty quick machining. Getting down in there, putting on these flats adds another operation. So we have, and I think we show you in the last lathe, we have a live axis lathe where we can do some of this stuff, and then we can also mill these flats on here. So in some instances we'll try and use a live axis lathe to minimize the number of operations. Again, every time we have an operation, there's typically added cost to it. Sometimes it makes the most sense because it makes a robust part. Sometimes it puts it able, we can run it on a simpler machine, and which will ultimately allow us to produce it faster. But trying to minimize the number of machining operations is pretty typical. Where did my flash hider go? So the flash hider, steel part. So this being aluminum, easier on the tools, tends to be a little bit less expensive than steel or comparable. This part, even though it's smaller diameter, you can see there's a lot of work there. We got holes to plug in, or to drill in. It's only on one side, so this part ends up going on a 4th axis. Working to see where we can minimize the tool wear, working to minimize the geometry that's going to make it more challenging both to machine repeatably, and yet we still want the function of that flash hiding. And so this one has performed well in the field. It's honestly, this one is driven by the market price, where there's a lot of people making really, really big quantities of it's kind of a standard that goes on most guns, especially the plastic clamshell guns, kind of the low end of the AR market, and so they're running tens of thousands of these. So when you're doing that, you're running it in a more production process, and it tends to drive the cost down, and it's tough for us when we're running, say, 300 or 400 at a time. It's tough for us to compete with those other guys, and so trying to make a design that makes it worth the extra couple bucks that ours will ours will cost to do that is important. Muzzle brakes. So muzzle brakes, we have them in steel, we have them in stainless steel. Again, this, we started out on a lathe, and then we have a lot of geometry here, and then the holes in the top. So we run these on a 4th axis also. Steel is harder on the tools than aluminum is, but the braking action that these provide is it's definitely the right application for some shooters. And we have them in regular, we have them in stainless, regular steel and stainless. Stainless obviously is more expensive, it's harder on the tools, and again it comes back to, hey, what's that feel you're looking for, what's that look you're looking for, that polished stainless, or do you want a black coated part. These get, and most of the steel stuff that we're doing, so there's a couple options. Most of them get black nitride coated. Some get black oxide coated. And the durability of those coatings vary. Some can get phosphate coated. We tend to nitride coat these. It's a little higher in finish than the others, but we think it's worth it in the durability that it provides. Again, those are different cost drivers. So when you're looking at parts to see what kind of coating it is, that will help adjust the price as appropriate. And then here's some little. So these are very small. This is just our little segments for the M-LOK rail segments. So again, they mount to the handguards. We have a couple different lengths. Obviously, the different lengths, they get more expensive when there's more material there. There's more machining there. The extra holes, these we do because of the way they mount to the M-LOKs. We have to cut the rail side. We have to cut the back side and the face. So again, it's two operations. They're fairly straightforward, and oftentimes when we have a family of products like this, we'll design our tooling and fixturing especially to be able to accommodate all three of them, so that we can run 1, 2, or 3, and it's not doing a new setup. It's this similar operation with a slight adjustment for the different lengths. Again, these get coated, and fairly straightforward parts, and that's where, looking at what it costs to make them, we try and make them as cost effectively as possible. Those are fairly common in the marketplace, and when we're doing something that is, there's nobody else really doing it, then it's more about, hey, if you can't get it from anybody else, then we can look at the cost and say, hey, this is something special. It has unique in the marketplace. We're not trying to shave pennies when compared to something like this, where there's 25 companies making something like this. It's not very expensive. There's somebody's making tens of thousands of them. How long does it take to do a 15-inch foundation series? It's varied, and I would say somewhere in the 35 to 40 minutes on that one operation. So we do the machining operation of the ends, and I'm going to say that's in the 5 to 8 minutes. And then this, so the foundation series, this is a 13, here's a 15. So they're going to vary. So let's say this is in the 35 to 40 minutes, and this is in the 30 to 35 minutes. And so that, you're adjusting for that length, so that the length difference between them. Obviously, there's more machining to do at the ends, but so that's roughly where it is. And then the post-processing, we're deburring them and inspecting them. We tumble them, so we put those in tumbling stones to knock some of the burrs and edges off of before we send them out to coating. So those are the big cost drivers, is that time to run them. And the other piece to that, and it's a good question, James, on the, so in a shop, there's a host of different ways people cost their stuff. So sometimes companies like ours will have a machine rate. So depending on the type of machine, there'll be a certain dollars per hour associated with that machine. And then depending on who the operator is, or the operator who could run it, you would want to be able to charge something if you're putting a $20 an hour guy or gal on it, or a $15 an hour guy or gal on it. And so mostly we we lump all that into one thing in a shop rate. And so people talk about the shop rate. It was really easy to do the math back maybe 10 years ago. We would just call it $60 an hour, because then if it was a minute at $60 an hour, it was $1 in cost. Well, now inflation, all that stuff, we've bumped up our shop rates to, the cost associated with doing business now, it's more in the $75 to $100 an hour, just based on the cost and the different machines. If we know it has to run on one of our higher end, more expensive machines, then we'll bump that shop rate up. If we know it's fairly straightforward, or it's on, it's a really fairly simple, we can run this on a mini mill, which is the least expensive machine that we have out there. Once we get it set, our newest, greenest operators can run this. Then we can charge less for that. So that's the the span of what goes into the cost of it. And so having a foundation series handguard, so let's say it takes 40 minutes at $85 an hour. I can't do that math in my head necessarily. Let's say it was $75 an hour, because that's an extra 15. So that's what, $1.25 per minute. So that's 40 plus, so that's $50 in cost in just that machining operation. If you add 5 to 7 minutes on the upstream operation, then you're right in that $60 to $70 of cost. It ends up, we coat it for $5 or $6, and we send it to coating, so we're paying for shipping charges. It ends up being $1-ish per part when we send skids back and forth to our anodizer, and so that's how we end up in that cost side, saying, okay, if it costs us $70 to make it and we charge, I think it's 105 as a MSRP, that's kind of how those numbers. So we want to have obviously some profit in there, and then we work to work the machine times down, and then we establish the appropriate level. So hopefully that helps, James, because that's those are common questions that we see, and we try and make sure we get the look that our customer is looking for. In this case, our foundation series, pretty straightforward stuff. It's more about just having a nice feel to it, but then we get with a lot of customers where they want some crazy designs and stuff, and so that's what we're building for them. We try and help encourage them to get machinable ones that won't drive. We used to have some cycle times that were up over an hour and 20 minutes, and it just made it a very expensive part. All right, the last thing I want to talk about. So we have our drop-in trigger. So we have our little trigger jig that we'll get it on fire so we can pull that. So this is our parametric trigger, right? So that really low creep 3.5 to 4 pound trigger. So here's the version of it not in the trigger jig, right? So there's a number of components to this, and these components, right, each of them, the 3 main components that go into the assembly to do it, they're made out of steel. They get wire EDM cut because we need them to be extremely precise, and so we actually start with a flat sheet of steel. You can actually still see maybe the heat treat marks on it. Yep, you can see that the discoloration from being heat treated. And then there's a bunch of holes in here in a particular pattern that we've engineered to be able to, let's see if I can line it up right. So it goes on there so that it mates up with the holes so the wire can feed in, and then it'll cut the shape, and then we'll break them off as we get close to the end. So this plate will make, looks like 14 or 15 triggers, maybe it's 12, I can't remember, but so we set it, and then the wire will do its cutting. It's a little different equation where we typically don't have to have somebody standing right there. Once we program it, then it'll run. There's electrical costs and the wire costs associated with that, but to be able to create really super precise parts. The housing that it goes in, and I tried to find just a separate housing, I couldn't find one, is CNC machined aluminum. So that aluminum housing, there's some pins and springs and stuff that go in there. So costing out the individual pieces and parts and how long they take to machine, and then putting it all together, they all get nitride coated or anodized. The aluminum gets anodized, and then there's assembly time. We have to do testing time to make sure we set the 3.5 to 4 pounds accurately. And so the opportunity to look at all that, this is one of the more expensive things we do, and yet, as Jim's talked about many times, it definitely changes the accuracy of the AR when you're shooting, right? Because the zero creep, when you pull it, it goes, right? So that's really cool. So again, there's a lot that goes into that, the engineering associated with it, getting this material, getting it to the right thickness, getting it wire EDM cut. And then actually so the trigger part itself, after it gets cut, there's some threaded holes that we have to thread. And so we worked with our tooling guys to get where we could thread it while it's hard. So in initial stuff, we threaded it, we cut it and threaded it when the material was soft, because we couldn't thread it while it was hard. And then we'd harden it. The problem is when you heat treat steel parts, they tend to move a little. And I mean, that was really not, it was not good for us we'd have to do more testing to make sure that nothing moved when the heat treat process happened. The different profiles on the different parts of the trigger are really thin, and so that thin cross section in heat treat definitely makes the thing want to go a little squirrely, and we can't have that when we're talking about the trigger. So now we heat treat it. So this, as I said, this is a heat treated blank. So then we can cut the wire EDM. Now we can thread it when it's hard, so that we haven't changed any of the other geometry except to be able to put the screws in to get it set. So again, pretty complicated, but really neat to see how that engineering process all comes together, and the cost associated with doing it, is challenging because you're using, a pretty precise machine in the wire EDM. So let's see. So I think that's a bunch of the stuff. I hope didn't bore everybody to tears when they want to talk about guns, and I'm talking about how to make parts. But I know as we look into the marketplace and we're trying to see, hey, how much should we charge for a foundation series, and we're comparing it to different things. We don't go in trying to attack the luxury market, if you will. We're going in trying to give people who want solid stuff. They want it to be cost effective, and mostly they're builders, right? They're building, they're modifying their ARs, and we want to have some cool stuff too. And yet making it affordable. As the business owner, Jimmy's looking at the marketplace, and he's also looking at what he's willing to pay and the comparable stuff there. And we know if we can't be cost competitive for the folks that are out there, then we probably won't be able to offer that product, right? And so the thing that we've been most cost competitive with, because we've been doing it the longest, and we've developed a really good process for, is the handguards. You guys have seen, and I know it feels expensive on our BYOAR site, is the Elevation series, where we've programmed in several different geometries for the top, several different geometries for under the rail, several different geometries for the 45s, where we can go in, and because we've made so many of these and we've made the process so it's almost a modular thing, where we can say, okay, let's make style number, the parallelograms, and let's put slots and slots underneath the rail, and we'll put slots on the top of the rail, and we can do that engineering up front so that it streamlines, hey, we want to run one of these through. And it's still, again, you're making one off for somebody doing a specific thing, so it's in the $300-400 range, which is certainly pricey, and yet you're getting exactly what you want. And a custom handguard like that, is actually extremely good deal. It's just expensive, right? And so it's expensive compared to just buying something off the shelf that looks pretty close to what you're looking for. And where we've used that a lot is in the business-to-business marketplace, where we're selling to companies that want to design their own handguard, and a lot of the big handguard companies, they'll do a 1,000-piece minimum on a $100 handguard. Well, that starts to feel like real money, right? $100,000. So we're doing a 50-piece minimum or 25-piece minimum on our Elevation series stuff, so that folks can put their logo on something and get it to look exactly as they want, really cool, and still have it be affordable. So trying to figure out ways to make stuff more cost effective for folks, both individually and Russ says he's late. He had to pick up a rifle, and I've been boring people to tears talking about stuff. You guys going to expand into things like buffer tubes, buffers, barrels, etc. So no, I think that there's definitely some stuff we use to make buffer tubes. Those are pretty commoditized because they're very similar rifle to rifle, manufacturer to manufacturer, and so those have been hard for, again, we're not running tens of thousands of anything, and if somebody is, they're going to be cost competitive, way cost competitive compared to us. Barrel making, we've talked with a couple of customers. There's an equipment investment that would be required, and so we've approached some of our bigger customers, or they've approached us saying, hey, maybe this is something you might want to get into. I think as the market slowed down coming out of the pandemic, and everybody put that talk on hold because there's more capacity in the marketplace than is needed. But we're constantly looking at different pieces and parts and opportunities, and I think that's part of the where can we find a niche that isn't huge volume, that is something that we can support a need in the marketplace. And as I said, Jimmy's down at the National Sheriff's Association show, knowing that the law enforcement folks are doing a lot with suppressed stuff, and to be able to provide an over-the-suppressor handguard that's easy to install, easy to change out, is certainly something that the feedback we've gotten from law enforcement is that's something that would be very useful to them. We're working to make it ergonomic and not drive the cost up too much, and be able to put something in. I think as we kind of gain some ground on the design and stuff, and we get it, our hope is by this SHOT Show we'll have something to be able to show and exhibit and sell. Once we've kind of established ourselves in the law enforcement space, we'll see, hey, is this something that parallels over into the regular BYOER people space? Because you know, it's something that it's a really cool design, and you know, the challenge is can we make it affordable? And the law enforcement guys have a little different equation than those of us who are just buying it for ourselves. I'm sure you know you guys saw Jim got his suppressor in, and he's excited to be able to play around with it, and having that handguard to be able to fit over his rifle so he can reach out and not have his hand get toasted while he's holding on to the end. So let's see, I'll be sure. Diameter depending, right. So it's funny, so we have the design that he put some M-lock attachments on it, and it was fit to just fit that 1-inch 750, so 1 3/4, which is the size of the suppressor that he got. So we wanted to get he tried to put it in and it was too big, because the one that we had, as soon as you put the little M-lock, the back side where the M-locks lock in, there was just enough interference that it didn't fit over that. So so as we do that, we want it to be able to swallow a 1-inch 750, because that's really the biggest quote-unquote standard one in the marketplace, and we definitely want to be able to do that. So you know, that's the goal, and you know, it's end of June now, to try and get that done before the SHOT Show in January. And what we've learned also is anytime we roll out a new product, there's all the associated stuff that goes with it. How are we going to talk about it? How are we going to sell it? How are we going to communicate with the marketplace to let them know what's happening, and be able to have it ready where the packaging and everything is set to go. So not a trivial thing, but certainly it's high on Jimmy's list. He's super excited to play around with that some more, because he kind of got it and then went straight to Kansas City, and so he'll have to get back this coming weekend and get a chance to do some shooting. So I think we better wrap it. This will be maybe officially the longest T350 show ever, except when Jim, I think, he did a full rifle assembly. So this will be good reason for him never to leave me alone, so that you guys won't have to deal with me doing the T350 show anymore. So hey, if you got questions, you know, Jimmy certainly he looks at a lot of the stuff in the marketplace, and obviously we have had to become price sensitive on what his stuff costs, and understanding why, and making sure, you know, Jim wants to pay for a value. He doesn't want to overpay for stuff. He's not looking to put a name on something to just say he's got it, that name. So he's a pretty good one to ask if you're looking for, hey, why does this cost so much? Is it worth it or not? At this point, he's done a lot of reviews of stuff, so a bunch of guys will send him stuff just to test it out and talk about it on the show. So he'll get a chance to continue to get chances to do that. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks, Russ. Good to see you, and glad you can make it in because I talked so long. You know, next week Jim will be back in the studio. Thank goodness for all of you. You won't be stuck with me, but hey, remember, you don't have to be an expert to build your own AR, to upgrade it or maintain it, and we're here to help you do that. So we'll see you next week. Thanks so much. Take care.